Hello guys. Today I'm gonna show you guys how to do a text-based, turn-based action game. So we're gonna have two players. It's gonna be like a two-player game. You can play with your friend. You guys take turn attacking each other, healing. There's gonna be some functionalities to it, but it's text-based, so there's nothing really. There's no graphics, nothing crazy. You can just play in the console, and yeah. I'm gonna be using object-oriented, so if you don't know Python, this is not for people who have no knowledge of Python. I think it's best if you go learn Python, learn the basics, uh, learn loops, functions, variables, whatever it is, right? But just make sure you learn the basics and then come back here because this is object oriented. And yeah, so let's get started. First off, I'm gonna just go ahead and import the random module because I'm positive I'm gonna be needing that. So we're gonna import that, and so what we're gonna do, we're gonna create a base class. So we're gonna call that fighter, right? Excuse me. So the base class is basically going to be there. It's gonna contain all the function because I'm gonna create four classes total. So I'm gonna have this base class, which is called fighter. I'm gonna have two other classes for each player, and then I'm gonna have a game class that is there to basically handle the game running, right? And so let's go ahead. I'm gonna go ahead and explain this further on as I go. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a method or constructor, and in here we're gonna go ahead and pass some values. So they are going to have a name. They're all going to have a health, which we'll just cut down to HP. Health point. We're gonna have attack, and they all will be able to heal. Okay, so we could just say self.name is equal to name self dot HP is equal to HP. I don't like how this format is. Self dot attack is equal to attack, and self dot heal is going to equal to heal. All right, there we have it. All right, so in case you didn't know, self is basically the instance of whatever class you're creating, right? So that's what self is. So if you were to create a class if you were to create an object for this fighter class, let's say you would create maybe you name it fighter1 is equal to, let's just say fighter, and we pass a name, say knight. Knight, we pass an HP, maybe 100. We pass an attack, also 100. Heal, I don't know, 50. Right? So with this right here, we just created an instance of the fighter class. Okay? So if you were to maybe create like an age for this fighter, we would say fighter.age. That's how those are attributes, right? That age. Now this doesn't exist in here, so we'll get an error, and you'll see it says it's, yeah, so we get an error here. But if we go to and we say fighter.age is equal to 19, right? Well, fighter1, sorry about that. Fighter1.age is equal to 19. Then we just created a attribute for this fighter1. And you'll notice we access these attributes or variables using the instance name, the object name, and then a period in between, right? So this fighter1 is basically what gets passed here. So as soon as we create this right here, we get fighter1 dot name is equal to name, so it's equal to knight. Fighter1 dot HP is equal to this HP, which we put to 100. So automatically, if we say print fighter1 dot HP, we go ahead and delete this, we should be able to get 100. Run this, and we got 100 down here. So that's the logic behind the self keyword that most people don't know of. Well, some people don't understand it. Most beginners don't understand it. And I'm also a beginner myself, but I've been learning for some time, But And just for reference, this doesn't have to be named self. It could be anything you want. You could name it anything you want as long as it's the first parameter. Okay, it has to be the first parameter. Alright, so let's go ahead and create the function that, well, all of our fighters will be able to use. So, but before the function, right, I want to add some more things. Now, I want to add some more attributes, but the thing is, I'm not going to pass them as a parameter. Those are all I want as parameter, right? But I want all of my fighters, right, to be able to have a max health. So we can say self dot max. We could say max HP is equal to, and then we could just say HP also, and then we could also want them to have a max heal, right? Self dot max heal is going to equal to heal, and then we want our fighters to be able to do a certain amount of damage, right? Now I know we have attack here, but you'll see why having a damage is going to be good. So we could say self that damage is going to equal to, and then we'll just set that to 0 for now. I spelled damage wrong. We're gonna set that equal to 0. Okay, so first off, we want to set a method that checks to see if our character is dead. Okay, it returns true if our character is dead and false if they are, well, still alive. And how we do that will be very easy. So we can go ahead and define our method and say we're gonna call it, what we say is dead, right? And then here we can return self dot HP is less than or equal to 0. So in other words, if your fighter's health is less than or equal to 0, then your fighter's dead, and this will return true. And we can use this method to check if our character is dead and, you know, write a logic based on if this is true or not. Okay, so next, what could we do here? We could do an attacking function, right? An attacking method to have our, and by the way, excuse me if you keep hearing me say function. I just don't use classes as much, so terminology is kind of off sometimes, although they are technically the same thing. But yeah, so let's just go ahead and call this method attacking. Okay, and it's gonna take one parameter, which is gonna be called defender. So before I get into that, we're gonna need an attacking one. We're gonna need one for healing. So let's just go ahead and just define all the functions we believe we'll be needing. All of our fighters will be able to heal themselves, so we could just say def healing. Now the reason I don't call it just heal is so there's no conflict between the attribute heal and the method heal. So I just call it healing, so it's a complete different name for this. Okay, so let's go ahead and pass this one also. I don't think this one will be needing any parameters, so could be needing one more, which will be display stats. So this one is going to be responsible for displaying the stats, right? Let you know what's going on in the fight, like, you know, who just attacked who, what's your current health within the battle, and everything. So we have this right now, and let's go back to the attacking one, and let's go ahead and write out the logic for this. So we had the self damage here, right? And this is what we're gonna use to basically, this is what we're gonna use to do damage. But I'm gonna show you how exactly that's gonna be done. So here we're gonna have a self that damage. Now we're gonna change its value, right? We're gonna set it equal to. Now, hear me out. I'm gonna type this out, and I'm gonna explain what it does later. So I'm gonna say max 0 random dot randit, and I could say self dot attack 0, self dot attack 1. Alright, so there we have it. So this is the damage. Now here's what I've just done right now, right? Essentially, this max function, it basically prevents our damage from ever being negative. Okay, basically prevents it from ever being negative. In case there's any, so it's kind of like a error handling we just did right there. We basically just did a error handling. So if anything here was to somehow go wrong and our value came out to be negative, then our damage would be 0. We would do no damage rather than actually set it to 0 to negative. And this one, it should always be higher than 0, but in case some weird thing happens, it's not, then we don't, our damage don't become negative. It just goes to 0 because that will then be greater than whatever negative number there is. 0 will be greater than it. And you see we have self.attack and of index 0 and self.attack of index 1. The random module has a function called randint, short for random integer, and it picks a value from the first. It picks a random number from the first number you passed to the second number you passed, including these numbers. So if the first attack was a value of 1 and the second attack is a value of 10, you can pick any number from 1 to 10, including 1 and 10, and it'll do so randomly. Now, the random module is not really so random, but it's the closest thing we get. We don't want to get into the logic behind why it's not random, so we'll just consider everything just random. But either way, so that's basically explains this entire line here, and which also lets you know that the self.attack attribute is going to be a tuple or a list. But I'm gonna make it a list, and later on I'm gonna show you guys why I chose a list instead of a tuple. Okay, so that covers this line. Let's go ahead and move on to the next line we'll be needing for the attack. So after, obviously the player will be attacking, now we have a defender, right? So we're causing damage to this person, to this player. Okay, so what we want to do now that we have our damage picked out, right? We have the amount of damage picked out. We want to decrease the health of this defender by the amount of this damage. So we could just say defender dot HP minus equals, which is the same thing as saying defender is equal to defender, which is the same thing as saying defender.hp is equal to defender.hp and then minus something, but defender.hp minus equal, and then we're just gonna say self.damage. And now just for visualization, we're just going to say self.name, so the current player that's attacking did, and then we're just gonna say self.damage, and then we're gonna say damage. Now I want to put whatever number we have always in brackets just so it could stand out a bit more. And well, there we have it. So I think that's all we will ever need for this attacking function method. We're done with this. That should handle all the logic we need for the attacking. Pretty easy, pretty simple. So we're gonna go into the healing, which actually before I go into it, let me go ahead and create our other classes, right? I'm gonna go ahead and collapse this real quick, and let's go ahead and create our other classes. So for our other classes, we're gonna need a player class, right? We're gonna have a player class and an enemy class. So let's go ahead and say class, and we're going to say player. It's going to inherit the fighters class, and let's go ahead and do our thing in here. So player class is gonna also have name, HP, attack, heal, but it's gonna have one additional attribute that the fighter's class didn't have, which is a crit, basically critical damage. And now let's go ahead and inherit the attributes for the from its parent class. Let's go ahead and just say fighter, super, and then let's go ahead and say let's grab the name, let's grab the HP, grab the attack, and let's grab the heal. Alright, and now this we still have to oops, sorry about that. This we still gotta set an attribute for it, so we could just say self dot crit, set it equal to crit. Okay, and let's go ahead and create our enemy class also. So we could just say enemy fighter. Now they will have very unique abilities, and well, it's pretty much essentially why I put them in separate classes, but yet they inherit the fighter's classes because they have things in common, but also they have very unique things. So inheritance is very perfect for that. So anyways, we have enemy fighter, and let's go ahead and just copy and paste this, and then we'll fix what we don't need just to save some time. Let's go ahead and copy, and let's go ahead and paste, and then we could just change the crit because this crit is going to be unique to the player only. Now we're going to change it, and we're going to give them something else. We're going to give I want the enemy to be able to, well, revive, right? I want them to be able to revive, and we're automatically gonna set a default value of 250 for that. So automatically they're gonna gain 250 health when they revive. Okay, and I want them to have one extra thing to I want to give them a defense, and we're also gonna set a default value for that for let's put none for now. We'll figure that out later. Okay, and now I could just go ahead and say self dot and say defense, set it equal to defense. Alright, so that works out. Now let's go ahead and create our game class, and if I'm going too fast, just let me know. Next time in my other videos I'll go a bit slower. So we're gonna create a game class. I just don't want to to be explaining every single thing I do, unless you guys don't mind that. And if you guys don't mind it, then just let me know and I will. But I don't want to be explaining every single thing and take up too much time, which I don't mind taking up too much time. I just don't want to take up too much of you guys' time. So yeah. Anyway, we got a class game. This one is not gonna hurt from anything, but something very unique that's gonna happen with that one. Let's go ahead and create a constructor. To keep things neat, right? I like to keep things neat. We're gonna call this one player and player, just like that. Player and enemy. There you go. So we have a player and an enemy. Basically, it's gonna take. Right now, it has parameters called enemy, but when I create an object, what I'm gonna pass in as for the argument is going to be the instance of each of these classes. So the instance of the player class is gonna be passed in for player as argument, and the instance for the enemy class is gonna pass in for enemy as argument. Now I'm gonna go ahead and keep on going with this just so you guys could see more of what's going on here. Alright, so let's go ahead and just say self dot player is going to equal to player, and self dot enemy is going to equal to enemy. Alright, and there's one more thing I want to do, which is I want to be able to switch players. So after one player, because the turn-based game, after one player is done attacking, I don't want the loop, because it's gonna be a loop that keeps going until a player is dead. I don't want the loop to return and then the same player gets to attack twice. What I want to do instead, is uh, yeah. So what I want to do instead is when the loop returns back after a player is done attacking, I want it to switch the players and change it to someone else. So by default, I want the starting player to be, oops, sorry, I'm gonna call it switch player. Okay, so by default, I want the player to start with, well, player. So this person will be the first to attack. So self.switch player is equal to self.player. Just like that. And now we can go ahead and create a method that handles the switching of players. So we could say def, and then we could say player switch. Player switch, we go ahead and say if self.switch player is equal to self.player, then we can just say self.switch player, set it equal to self.enemy. And then else. So if that's not the case, oops, sorry about that. So if that's not the case, we're just gonna say self.switch player is equal to self.player. So that's gonna handle that. And a little quick run through of what I just did, because this might have just gotten confusing a little bit. Yeah, so a little quick run through, right? Player 1 is going first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this function at the very bottom of the loop, right? Once all the attack and all the game logic is done, I'm going to put it at the bottom of the loop so it can activate and switch the player, and then the loop goes back up. So what this does is it checks to see if the current player is, well, self-that player. So, and self-that player actually does go first, right? Remember, the attack first. So I pick my attack, and then this function activates. It's going to look to see, and it's going to see that this is true, right? That the current player is self-that player. So what it's going to do is change this attribute's value to self-that enemy instead. So then now enemy gets to attack, right? But if that's not true, and the current player is enemy, then it's going to skip this if statement. It's going to skip this if statement. It's going to go to the else. Then it's going to change the player to the player, normal player. Hopefully that makes sense, but you'll see it work out in a bit. So I could just go ahead and create our game loop, self.run, right? And now I could go ahead and say while not self.player is dead. Now remember, this player, now the reason why this can access the method from the fighter class is because if you remember correctly, I say these guys are going to be objects. They're going to be instances of the enemy and player class. So they have and they do share these methods, so they can access them also. So we're gonna say self.player, and then we're gonna make them access the isDead function. So if self.player is not dead, if self.player is dead, right? So if their health is hold on, let me write this out and I'll explain real quick. I just kind of confused myself a little bit here. And self.enemy is that is dead. Alright, so essentially, right, the not function basically takes whatever value is here and it reverses it, right? It gives the opposite. So if this right here is true, the not function becomes false. And if it's false, then the not keyword, sorry about saying function, and the not keyword makes it true if it's false. So basically what I'm saying is, okay, so right now let's get rid of this real quick, right? What this is saying, without, forget about the thing in the back, what this line right here, just this is saying, right? Pretend that was all there was to the while loop. It's saying that while self.player is dead, so basically, remember while loops check to see if the condition is true. It checks to see if there's a true condition, and if it is true, then it will run the loop. But if the condition is false, then the loop stops. But what this is saying is that while self.player is dead, and right now it's not. So because our health is, if we go back to this, you'll notice it's saying self.hp is less than or equal to 0. So until our health is less than or equal to 0, this function here, this method here is false. So this right here is false. But to make it true, because the while loop needs a condition that's true in order to run, to make it true, and I already explained that the not keyword prints out, basically spits out the reverse of whatever Boolean value this holds. So to make this true, we need to reverse the Boolean value that it currently holds, which is false, right? So we could just go ahead and say not, and this will reverse their value. And as soon as they're dead, then the value gets reversed again, and then this becomes false, and the loop ends. And remember, this and also means that both of this has to be true at the same time in order for this to keep running. So as soon as one player is dead, even if the other player is alive, which makes one part of this true, the while loop will stop working because both of them needs to be true. Alright, so hopefully that makes sense. That was probably the best I could do. Sorry about that if you didn't get it. Let's go ahead and create a variable called player choice, and essentially the player is going to be able to choose their attack, choose their move, right? So we could go ahead and say self.switch player.name. Then we're gonna say pick. Now again, the reason I'm able to access these attributes as if the switch player was a instance is because we did set the switch player to be either enemy or player, and it's gonna keep switching between them. So that's why I can access that. So we're gonna say self.switch player pick a move, and then we're gonna say 1 for attack, 2 for heal. There you go. 1 for attack, 2 for heal. And now we could just write the comment if statement if player choice is equal to 1. Now this is a string rather than an integer, because by default the input value takes in string unless you wrap it around in the int function. But I don't want to do that because the error handling is a lot easier in this scenario than wrapping it around it. Because if I did wrap it around an integer, then I'd have to make my code a bit longer to handle the error in case somebody actually did type an integer. But in here you can type anything you want, it'll take it as an integer. So that's why I just left it as default. Okay, so now and then we can say if player choice is equal to 1, right? Then we're just going to say, we're going to have another if in here. We're going to have if self dot switch player is equal to self dot player, right? So if the current player, if the switch player is currently this player. So we'll just call this one player one. Is if the switch player attribute is currently holds the value currently of player one, then it means that player one is basically choosing the attack and is attacking. So we're just gonna write the logic for their attack. So we're gonna say self dot switch player. Then we could say dot attacking. So players attacking. Switch player dot attacking, and then we're gonna say self dot enemy. Now remember, if you remember correctly, we pass in this because the attacking function, the attacking method, has a defender parameter, and now when we call it, we're gonna have to pass in that argument. So the enemy is the one defending when player is attacking, enemy is defending, and when the enemy is attacking, then player is defending. So you'll see we're gonna switch that around too when we code for the enemy attacking. So basically, that's why we passed in this here when we called the right here when we call the method. So that should handle the attacking here, and then we could just say else. So if it doesn't equal to switch player, if switch player doesn't equal to self that player, then there's only one more choice for it, which is it being equal to self that enemy. So we're just gonna do the same thing. We're gonna copy this and we're gonna paste this. The only difference is that now the defending player is going to be player rather than enemy. Okay, so let's see here. Let's go ahead and play this real quick just so we can see what we have. Okay, so clearly we don't have anything. I don't know why. I don't remember to do that. So we're gonna go ahead and create our players, right? We're going to have player one and player two. So let's go ahead and say player one is equal to, and then we're gonna say player. Let's go ahead and say name is equal to. Let's call this one knight, right? Then let's say HP is equal to maybe 10, set it like 100, and then attack. Now remember, this was gonna be a tuple. If we, not a tuple, a list. If we don't put it as a list, then we're gonna get an error because we already coded this as if it was a list. So we have to make it a list, and it's gonna be a range of attack, right? Any random value between I guess 10 and 50. You can do anything like that. And just so it doesn't last any longer, let's just do like 40 and 50. And then we could have a heal. Set heal is equal to let's also make that like a random value between like 20 and 80 or something. Again, I'm going random here, and then we'll have crit, because remember this player has a crit attribute. So we're going to set crit to 1.8, and I'll explain everything later again. So let's go ahead and copy this. For the sake of simplicity and time, I'll just keep everything the same except for the name. I'll just change the name here to say warrior or something. Couldn't spell warrior. Then we're just gonna change the enemy. There you go. Oh, sorry, it doesn't have a crit function, a crit parameter. So we're gonna leave this here. Now the reason why we don't have to pass in, where's the enemy? Yeah, so you'll notice we have defense and revive, but we're not gonna get an error when we run this. That's because we already set a value to them. So they have a default value, and we don't have to worry about passing it to them. So let's go ahead and create one for game. Let's say game is equal to game, and let's go ahead and pass in let's say player is equal to player one. Could be the first one to go, and then we're gonna say enemy is equal to player 2. And now we could just call the game.run method that this game has, and if we run it, then automatically we should be able to play. Okay, so you'll see it says pick a move. It says knight, pick a move. So player 1 actually does go first, which their name is knight. So let's go ahead and say 1. So you'll see it says knight did 49 damage. Okay, so you'll see knight gets pick again to pick another move, right? And then it's always knight, knight, knight. That's because I never called this player switch function. So I'll stop this and I'll go ahead and call that method, and I'll just say player oopsie, yeah, I forgot to self dot player switch. There you go. So let's go ahead and rerun. Let's go ahead and just do this. So knight picked an attack, pick 1, it did 50 damage, and now warrior's turn is to go. And after warrior should be knight then, and now you'll see it says knight pick a move, pick 1, and now you'll see it says warrior pick a move, and this will keep going. Now you'll see the program end. That means somebody died. And let's see. So warrior died because knight was the last to attack, and then the game ended right after that. So warrior died. So pretty simple. The only problem is we have no clue what's going on underneath. We just get in how much damage we did. So that's where this display stats method comes through. But we're going to explain that in another video in part 2, because I don't want to make the parts too long, but we're going to explain that in part 2, and we're going to code a lot more in part 2. Hopefully I'm wishing to finish this entire game in part 2. Alright guys, take care. I'll see y'all later.